Hello, everyone, and welcome. We have quite a few folks registered for tonight, so we're going to give it just a couple of minutes for more folks to join us. We're up just over 100. Happy to see that everybody is on this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are. We'll give it just another moment. All right. Hello, everyone. We've still got a couple folks trickling in, so we'll give this just another minute. All right. Looks like we've stabilized a little bit. So, hello, everyone. Good evening to those of you on the East Coast or maybe internationally. Good afternoon to anyone who's joining us, maybe from the West Coast. Um, we are really happy to offer this session on financial aid and you. This is our first time doing a June presentation to incoming first year students to try to explain some of the things that hang students and families up a little bit, things that might be a little complicated. We've got some slides that my colleague Alex will go through today. I'll allow him to introduce himself in a moment. I also want to point out that I've got four other members of my staff who have joined us. I guess, first of all, hi, I'm Carrie, Carrie DeFonso. I am the Director of Undergraduate Financial Aid. Um, Maybe you've seen me on a presentation before. Maybe you met me at spring at our Bulldog Days this past spring. But we're really happy that everyone is on tonight. Looks like we've got about 175 of you joining us this evening. As I said, Alex will be taking over most of the presentation. I've got four staff who are here. They'll be behind the scenes answering the questions and answers, the Q&A section. So please, if as we're going through this presentation, you have questions, put them in that Q&A section. We've got some folks who will answer those live, and we'll also feed some of those to Alex towards the end of the presentation to answer some. This is I've got a phenomenal team of people. Alex will talk a little bit about our model and our customer service model, but I just want to say that these sorts of presentations and the engagement that we have with all of you would not be possible without the team that we have. So if you have not yet met your personal financial aid counselor, which Alex will talk about. I would encourage you to do so and be in touch with our office with any questions that you might have. Here on this first slide, we'll actually show you our contact information. So you can email us at undergrad.fa@yale.edu with any questions that you may have. You can pick up the phone and call us between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. The phone number is listed here. Or if you're in New Haven, or when you're in New Haven for you new students, you can stop by 246 Church Street and see us in person. So I will go ahead and pass this over to you, Alex. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Looking forward to answering some of your questions and hopefully clearing up things that might be a little confusing to folks.
All right. Thank you very much, Carrie. And hello, everyone. I hope you find this webinar helpful. As Carrie said, this is the first time we're doing something like this for our incoming students and their families. So we'll see how it goes. So as Carrie alluded to before, we do have a personal financial aid counselor model. This is something that we moved to about a year and a half ago. And so your personal financial aid counselor, and when I say your, I'm to students, is your primary connection in undergraduate financial aid. There's a full list of counselors available on our website. You should have already received an email from your counselor indicating, introducing themselves, saying, here I am, I'm here to assist you throughout your journey, throughout your 4 years at Yale. If you have any questions, send them my way. Personal financial aid counselors are available by email. We ask that you use our primary department email, and then that message can be routed to your counselor. You're also welcome to schedule an appointment, either remotely by Zoom or in person, and you can do that through the link on this page through our appointment page, or you're certainly welcome to walk in. Our general service hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. That actually also applies to the times that our phones are open, and that is Eastern time. So you can also give us a call, press extension 2-203-432-2700, and we would be happy to help you that way. Do know, however, that you don't have to. There are other people to assist you in the office. For example, my colleague Taylor, who's on the call with us today in the background, she is one of our frontline team members. The other one being Alyssa Alchimio. If you've called our office, you've probably spoken with one of them. Those names probably ring a bell. So do know that there are other ways to contact us. There are other people here to assist you. But again, if you're looking for like, who is my dedicated contact? Who is going to know me best throughout my time at Yale? That would be your personal financial aid counselor. So now that we've moved to this slide, cost of attendance, we want to go over a few items here tonight, just terminology, basic foundational principles of financial aid. One of those, the biggest one being the cost of attendance. So this is all the expenses that a student will face while attending Yale. Some of these are fixed expenses, such as tuition. Others are estimates, for example, what a student might spend on books or personal expenses or travel. And we'll go into more detail about those on subsequent slides. The cost of attendance, and you may recall this from seeing your financial aid offer letter, we break it out into both billed and unbilled expenses. And so the billed expenses, that would be something like tuition, of course, the largest single item. If you're living on campus, which as a first year, you all will be living on campus, includes the charge for housing, the charge for food or the meal plan, the student activity fee, other miscellaneous fees, such as, for example, Yale Health Insurance. But we do recognize when we are constructing your financial aid package, when we are determining your eligibility for financial aid, that a student incurs costs beyond those for which we bill you. And so these are the unbilled expenses. And as I mentioned before, that could be personal expenses, books and course materials, travel costs, and these are estimates, but those comprise the unbilled expenses. So moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what it looks like. This, in fact, is taken from one of our financial aid offer letters. And you may notice, and there is an asterisk, this is from the previous academic year, the academic year that ended in last month, the 24-25 academic year. That is not a mistake. That is intentional, because on subsequent slides, we're going to show you how the items on the financial aid offer letter, the cost of attendance, relate to the bill, your actual bill, the charges that you will see in Yale Pay, and Bill's fee assessment for the following year for 25-26 has yet to occur. So we wanted to be able to show you the same numbers in both places. So as you can see, as I alluded to on the previous slide, there's tuition, housing, and food, the student activity fee. Those are the billed expenses. And then you can see below that how the unbilled expenses are displayed on the letter. Now do notice to the right, there is fine print. And we put a lot of effort into what that fine print is, into the information that we share with you on these letters. And so right there, for example, we include a couple bullet points explaining what I just shared. What are billed expenses? What are unbilled expenses? What's the difference between the two? And again, the reason that we include both is we realize that the costs a student incurs attending Yale are not limited to simply the charges for which we bill you. All right, so this is what it looks like in practice, the numbers from the financial aid offer letter. Now notice that costs of attendance, for example, tuition, the $67,250 charge. That, when we put together a financial aid offer letter, it covers the entire academic year. So that's the annual amount. Both the fall and the spring term amounts of tuition are rolled into one. And what you'll see here in this screenshot example from an actual student's Yale Pay account shows you the charge for the Yale term. So it's, or pardon me, the fall term only. So this is not a mistake. This is not, this student is only being charged half tuition. No, they're being charged half of that annual tuition because, again, it is for the fall term only. And so you see the student activities fee, the tuition, the housing, the meal plan. Now, the student activities fee, that is an exception. That is an annual, that is charged only in the fall term. That's not a charge that recurs in the spring term. So that the amount that you saw on the financial aid offer letter does actually directly correspond to what is here on the bill. I think it's also worth pointing out that you saw the charge for Yale Health coverage. I covered that earlier in terms of examples of billed expenses. This is what it looks like if you do not waive Yale Health coverage prior to the charge being added to your account, but then you subsequently waive it. And the deadline for doing so for the fall term is September 15th. So in this particular example, the student waived their Yale Health coverage, or at least that waiver was processed on August 5th. And so that original $1,555 positive charge now shows up as a negative. That's the reversal of the charge. So that's something to be aware of. That's just Yale's way of showing you that this charge was subsequently waived. It was reversed. So that's the charges on the top half of this bill. On the bottom half, you'll see the payments and credits. And so the largest credit in this particular case happens to be the financial aid, the Yale scholarship. Now, you'll also notice that this is we chose this example deliberately because it also shows the Yale payment plan, which is one of the options that you have if you have a balance due to Yale for paying that balance. And you may notice that the bottom two credits for the Yale payment plan are for a different amount than the top credit. And the reason for that is this is likely someone who enrolled in the Yale payment plan based on an estimate of the financial aid they expected to receive. And their financial aid ended up actually being greater than what they expected to receive when enrolling in the Yale payment plan. And what happens then is the Yale payment plan automatically rebalances downward. It reduces any remaining scheduled payments. And do be aware that the reverse, however, does not happen. If you were to enroll in the Yale payment plan and the amount for which you enroll is actually not sufficient to cover the balance due to Yale, you would need to take action and contact our colleagues in student accounts and ask them to adjust the payment plan upward to cover that remaining balance. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So this is an example again of a bill. We broke it out into two parts because there's a few more transactions on this bill, and we wanted to give you two examples. One where a student has a balance due to Yale. In other words, their charges are greater than their financial aid. But then we also wanted to show a situation where the financial aid is actually greater than those charges, a credit balance or a refund type situation. So here you see many of the same charges that you saw on the previous slide, with the addition of the foot equipment rental fee, again, a fee that was subsequently reversed. So you see the positive charge followed by a negative charge for the same amount. If we could move on to the next slide, please. This shows, and if you were in Yale Pay, you'd actually see this all on one screen. We broke it up into two separate slides so it wouldn't be quite as busy. But on this one, you would see, bear in mind the previous example where there was a balance due to Yale, that payment and credit section was all there was in addition to the charges. Here you also see a refund, and that represents that difference. Yes, there are situations in which we actually give students more financial aid than they need to pay their billed expenses. You may ask, why do we do that? And that's for the unbilled expenses. So in this particular example, this is a student for their first semester at Yale. They had a refund of over $2,600. What could they use that money for? What do we intend them to use that money for? To pay for books, to pay for supplies, course materials and equipment, to pay for travel to and from Yale, those unbilled expenses. Also, this is sometimes students who have financial aid packages, financial aid that exceeds their charges. And if we could back up to the previous slide for just a moment, thank you. You see there's activity that can take place. For example, here's the winter clothing grant. On the slide before that, you saw the equipment fee for foot. It's always important, even if your initial financial aid offer is greater than your charges, to monitor Yale Pay throughout the year. And our colleagues in student accounts at the beginning of every month, they send out a notification to anyone who has had activity on their account in the previous month or whose balance is not zero, saying, hey, log in to Yale Pay, check it out, see if there's any action that you need to take. So that's an important takeaway for those of you in the audience who may be in the situation where your financial aid exceeds your charges. Thank you. So if we could resume with unbilled expenses, so these again are not paid directly to Yale. They do not appear on a bill, and they fall into roughly these three categories: books, personal, and travel expenses. And on the next slides, we'll go into a little bit more detail about what those represent. So first of all, books. When we put together your financial aid offer, when we determine your eligibility for financial aid, we include an estimate of what you can expect to pay on books. And this is a very important principle when it comes, or actually a couple important principles when it comes to unbilled expenses. One, it is an estimate. However, if you spend more or you spend less than what we have estimated, your financial aid remains the same. We stick with our estimate. Also, we sometimes will hear from students, okay, my financial aid offer indicated this amount for books or this amount for travel. Where do I go to get access to that money? It's actually already incorporated into your Yale scholarship. So the Yale scholarship that pays to your Yale Pay, that pays to your student account, already includes the financial aid intended for these unbilled expenses. And that's one of the important distinctions between the financial aid offer and the bill. Because the financial aid, while it may include aid for unbilled expenses, or in determining the amount of that Yale scholarship, we considered what those unbilled expenses were. In practice, it all gets applied toward the billed expenses because it's all applied to the bill. So hopefully that explanation did not make your head spin, but it's an important concept. So something else to keep in mind is, for example, books. Students need to have access to those funds on the first day of class, because within that first week, it's off and running. Yale, once you're after the first week of classes, you need to have those books because professors don't waste any time in assigning reading. So, and especially if you are expecting to receive funds from an outside scholarship, And let's say that is what leads to your total financial aid exceeding your charges. So you know that you're going to expect to receive a refund at some point. If we have yet to receive those outside scholarship funds, we can't advance them to you. We can't include that in a refund. So it's always a good idea to have a little bit of money on hand to pay out of pocket, even if you're in a situation where eventually you'll receive a refund. That refund can serve as a reimbursement for what you pay out of pocket up front. Now, books, there are some options to save money, and we've included those as bullet points here on this slide, such as renting from the Yale Library, Course Reserves, Borrow Direct, Amazon, and so forth. Another example of unbilled expenses, and again, this is an estimate, personal expenses. So we estimate $1,350 per term, again, used in determining the Yale scholarship. This is not like a separate pot of money that you need to access or request access to. And personal expenses, we included some examples of what those might be. Toiletries, laundry, entertainment, fun. Yes, that is considered part of the cost of attending Yale. Co-pays for medications and doctor, and clothing. Clothing is an important one, especially for those of you from warmer climates. Come October, you may be looking at having to purchase a winter coat. Travel expenses, like all the other unbilled expenses, an estimate and included in determining your Yale scholarship. Now, you may recall a few slides ago, I mentioned whether you spend more or less than what we have estimated, we are not going to adjust financial aid for that reason. Now, do know if you are in a situation where you need to borrow a loan and your travel or other unbilled expenses exceed what we have estimated, that could lead to additional loan eligibility. But in terms of the gift aid, the Yale scholarship, that amount is not going to change if you spend more or less than what we estimate. The travel expenses, those are determined through market research. We rely on our colleagues in the Office of Institutional Research to come up with those figures. It's based on a student's permanent residence. And this is a key point and something that trips up some students. It's actually the permanent residence that's entered into our student information system. And so if you change your permanent residence, for example, let's say you come from California or Kansas or Michigan or wherever it may be, we determine the travel expenses in your financial aid based on that permanent residence. If you subsequently change your permanent residence, for example, to New Haven, you will see the travel expenses in your financial aid go down and perhaps go down significantly. So do keep in mind that permanent residence should remain at all times your permanent residence. If you want to update your mailing address, you're certainly welcome to do so, and it's not going to have the same impact. It's intended to cover the cost of travel to and from campus at the beginning and end of each semester. And I do apologize, we often will use the terms, no pun intended, semester or term interchangeably, the fall term or fall semester. It does not include travel over the Thanksgiving and spring breaks, however. So if that is something that you plan to do, please know that those are not costs that we have considered in determining your financial aid. And a couple tips, booking early certainly is a good way to save money, 2 to 3 months ahead of time for domestic travel or more than 3 months for international travel. This is something we picked up from our colleagues in the Office of Educational Opportunity, that it's a good idea to search for flights and any travel for that matter in incognito mode. That way, the site doesn't know where you're located. They don't know what your search history and preferences are, and they are likely potentially to offer you a lower cost option. And Kayak and Google are good places to start. to look for those to make those travel arrangements. Refunds. You may recall in the second example that we showed, the Yale Pay bill where the financial aid exceeded the charges. That's what, we call a refund situation. They are available 7 calendar days prior to the start of a term, which is when financial aid is scheduled to pay to your Yale Pay account. The fastest way to get a refund is by direct deposit. It must be a US bank, and it's a good idea, even though this particular type of refund, transfer of money from Yale to you as the student, is not done by Zelle, it's done by ACH. There are other offices, other programs that will utilize Zelle, or that is their preferred method for delivering those funds to you. So if you don't already have a bank, or you are looking to change a bank, maybe to find one with greater availability in the New Haven area, it's a good idea to look for one with a Zelle option. It's going to ease it's going to make your ability to receive funds from, again, these different Yale offices and programs that much easier in the future. Do monitor your checklist, your financial aid checklist in Yale Hub, and we'll show you a screenshot of that shortly for any missing items. Typically, in subsequent years, when you're reapplying for financial aid as a continuing student, we aren't going to send you a financial aid offer until we have absolutely everything that we need from you, not only to determine your financial aid, but to deliver that financial aid to you, to pay it to your Yale Pay account. Things are a little bit different as an incoming student. You had a window of opportunity in which you needed to make a decision whether to attend Yale. And so we wanted to provide you with financial aid information as soon as we possibly could. There might be a couple items that we still need to collect from you. Maybe we need this form. Maybe we need a copy of your passport to confirm your citizenship, things along those lines. So do monitor your checklist for those missing items. Both our office and our colleagues in the University Financial Aid Office do send out periodic communication to any student who has such missing requirements. But as with most things, it behooves you to be proactive and to see if there are those missing items, because that could potentially delay the delivery of those funds to you. Please do know that and I touched on this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. If that refund is from an outside scholarship, or the reason that your financial aid exceeds your charges isn't just because of your federal and institutional aid, but due to an outside scholarship, again, we need to receive those funds before that refund can be made available to you. All right, here's a screenshot of Yale Hub, specifically the link to request a refund from a student account. So as a student, you need to log in, select student account from the sidebar. It's pretty intuitive, I think you'll agree, and then simply follow the instructions on the form, which I believe are largely limited to entering your account number and the routing number for your financial institution. Again, these are only for situations where your financial aid, where your credits on your account exceed those charges. And that's indicated by when you log into Yale Pay, instead of a positive number indicating a balance due on the account summary screen, the first screen that you see when you log in, it'll be a negative amount. And this shows you also how on that same menu in Yale Hub, you can authorize direct deposit. And again, that's the preferred method. If you do not enroll in direct deposit, it is not as if the refund is not made available to you. However, it's going to be by paper check. You're going to have to come into the student accounts office to pick that up. And obviously that's going to delay when you can access that money. And again, it must be a US bank in order to receive funds by direct deposit. Budgeting, and thank you for bearing with us. We're getting close to the end of the webinar, and I know that there are some additional questions that I'm happy to address. Just a couple more slides. So budgeting, there is a financial literacy site at Yale. We'll also touch on that on our resources page in just a moment, finlit.yale.edu, and that offers some suggestions for how to manage unbilled expenses, how to, estimate, like, okay, what is my income? How to build a budget? What examples of sources of income? It could be summer employment, a job you have before coming to Yale. It could be term time employment, pardon me, a job that you have while at Yale, either on or off campus. Maybe you have some savings. Maybe your financial aid exceeds your charges and you'll have a refund. Maybe you're receiving direct support from your family. It's a good idea to itemize personal expenses. Again, we've estimated what those will be. The next slide will show you how, that might break out in an itemized fashion across the months of the fall semester. You might want to use a spreadsheet or an app such as Rocket Money or Every Dollar to help you to build those budgets, to manage your expenses as well as the income to pay those expenses. And yes, thank you. So this is an example, and again, this is based on a resource from our colleagues from the Office of Educational Opportunity, how that $1,350 personal expense estimate can be broken out across the months of the fall semester. So there's money for laundry, which could be either through our on-campus laundry, we have a service, or through the laundry that's in each residential college. There's eating out, and you might say, wait a second, $30 to eat for the month? Do keep in mind, these are personal expenses. This doesn't include, this is in addition to the meal plan for which you are billed, if you're living on campus, that covers 21 meals. But there may be times when you want to eat out. Toiletries, clothing. In this particular example, you can see the clothing is all in 1 month. This might be someone from a warmer climate who, come October, is purchasing a winter coat, hat, and gloves that they did not previously have. The medical, that could be copays. Personal care, entertainment, again, having fun, that is part of the cost of attending Yale. And this is what totals out to the $1,350 for the semester. So just a quick plug for our next such session. In 2 weeks' time, on June 25th, at the same time, 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have another similar webinar like this one, that's going to cover some other elements of financial aid, the student share, term employment, outside scholarship, and loans. We touched on those briefly here today, but really the focus of today's presentation was to go over the financial aid offer and billing. Registration is currently open for this next session. And like this session, it will be recorded, it will be posted to our YouTube channel. And once that's ready, we'll include that link on our website. This next slide is just a few helpful websites. Ours, of course, undergraduate financial aid, the financial literacy page or website, pardon me, that I touched on just a moment ago. Course reserves, where you can access books for your courses. Yale Hub, which encompasses not just finances, not just, Yale Pay, the direct deposit authorization requesting a refund, is where you can access information about your financial aid offer, about missing financial aid requirements. There's a registration module. It is the primary way that you engage with our colleagues in student affairs and student services here at Yale. And then there's also a link to the student accounts, specifically the Yale Pay site, or a link to it. So I know that there are some additional questions, and I'd be happy to address those at this time, fed from my colleagues. So thank you for your help. I've been watching the chat throughout this webinar, so I know a lot of your questions have already been answered. I do want to thank my colleagues for helping me with this presentation. But we thought that this was a good place to end. This is our new website, actually just rolled out last week. So if you haven't been on our site in a little bit of time, it may look a little different. We're hoping that the new website will be a little slicker, a little easier to navigate. Hopefully a few less words, but more impactful. All right. So, let's see. I'm going to start. Looks like my colleagues are addressing the questions and answers. So bear with me just while I scroll through these responses in the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna allow my colleagues to continue doing the terrific job that they've done with the Q&A and alert me if there's something that I should answer live. But I do see a request to revisit the travel estimates and the family's responsibility to pay those costs up front. And frankly, I'm not surprised to see that, because this is again that idea of, well, unbilled expenses and the estimate and how that's included in the Yale scholarship. So the way in which you would be reimbursed for travel expenses would only be in a situation where your financial aid exceeds your charges. So a refund type situation. Because again, the idea behind the unbilled expenses is that we are including that in determining your financial aid. And what we didn't do, but if what we pulled that cost of attendance from, if you may recall from the earlier slide, where it showed the tuition, the housing, the food, etc. That's the whole financial aid offer letter. And I like to say that the purpose of that letter, yes, ultimately is to tell you this is the amount of financial aid for which you qualify, but to show our math. My wife is a math teacher, so I have that kind of mentality. Show your math. How did you arrive at that amount? Well, here are the costs for attending Yale, the direct costs, the billed costs. Here are the unbilled costs. And then we determine, this is why we ask you for all that financial information about your income and assets and so forth, to determine a parent share and a student share. And it's the difference between the cost of attending Yale and those parent and student shares. That is the financial aid. So that's the reason we show that. We do realize, we recognize that in some ways that could be misleading. But again, when, let's say, what we estimate your travel expenses to be is $1,500. Well, that means that when we included that in your cost of attendance, and then we determined your financial aid based on that. So you might be in a situation, and as you may recall, that first example that we showed with the Yale Pay account, that was a family who was receiving substantial financial aid, but their financial aid was less than their billed charges. And so that's why they enrolled in the Yale payment plan. That's the option that they chose to make up that difference. So while while our estimate for that student's travel expenses was included in that student's financial aid, since that total financial aid was still less than what the charges due to Yale were, there was no refund. So in that case, certainly that's a family, that's a student that is not going to see money coming from Yale in the form of a refund to pay for travel expenses. And again, due to the availability of when refunds can be made, when funds can be transferred, preferably by direct deposit to a student, bear in mind the soonest that can happen is 7 calendar days before the start of a term. And that's not when you should be making your travel arrangements. So that's something that needs to be paid up front. And then whether those funds can be reimbursed through financial aid ultimately depends on, okay, what is the relation between my financial aid and my charges? Is one greater than the other? So I hope that helps clear things up a little bit. This also would be a good opportunity where you're saying, okay, Alex, that just a big jumble of words and it doesn't answer my question, to reach out to your personal financial aid counselor, because we're speaking in general terms, even though we did provide some concrete examples. And so your personal financial aid counselor is the person who's going to be able to speak to your specific situation. These are what your charges are. These are what your travel expenses are. This is what your financial aid is. And I think by addressing your situation specifically, hopefully that will make some more sense. I understand we had a lot of questions about laundry. That's one of the personal expenses. Um, Laundry is not free at Yale. We do offer a laundry service through the Associated Student Agencies. If you have not yet received information about that, you will be shortly. It's not a requirement, but some students opt to use that service. There are also laundry facilities within each residential college that, and I believe those accept coins or cards. And so that's another way to access laundry services. I do realize I made a mistake in saying, oh, you can just refer to the email that we sent you introducing you to your personal financial aid counselor. That is still in the planning stages. That will be coming shortly. Do know that that assignment has already taken place. In almost all, that is the person who actually reviewed your financial aid application materials and determined your financial aid. We don't make it a secret as to who that is. If you were to go to our website and either go to the contact us, our team, or the link to schedule an appointment, that's where all those counselors are listed. In most cases, it's determined by the first letter of your last name in terms of who you're assigned to. And so that should be going out by the end of this week, that email, and that again will be your introduction to who that person is. And let's see. I understand there was some questions about the technology policy or the technology grant. We are going to cover that in the next webinar when we talk about outside scholarships. So do bear with us, give us a couple more weeks and we'll cover that. But again, you can certainly contact our office. This is not the only way for us to help you through these webinars. Give us a call, shoot us an email, schedule an appointment with your counselor, and they can walk you through what that policy is. And I believe that covers most of what, or if not all of what, is in the chat. So I'll give my colleagues who've been working fast and furiously, I'm sure their fingertips are calloused by now from answering your questions. We do have some other correspondence that we're planning to send to our current or continuing students. So if you don't get that email about who your personal financial aid counselor is by the end of this week, don't fret. It will be no later than next week. Um, this is something that does not need to wait until and actually, pardon me, I'm stumbling over my words, bear with me. Um, in terms of outside scholarships, I will say that all students receiving financial aid are required to let us know if they're receiving an outside scholarship because it may result in an adjustment to your financial aid offer. But more importantly, if it's funds that pay to Yale, we want to create a record within our system that reflects that we can expect to receive those funds, and that's going to potentially reduce your balance due to Yale. So included in that email that introduces you to your personal financial aid counselor, there will be a link to our outside scholarship form. But if you don't want to wait, you can access our website now. Do know, however, that on our forms page right now is not the electronic or dynamic form. It's just a link to the PDF. But if you want to get a head start, you can download the form, print it out, fill it out, and then upload it to us. Our upload portal link is on the top right corner of that form. I'm going to jump in here now, and I see there's a question about what's the difference between a work study job and a term time job. Really, for all intents and purposes, there really isn't one. Um, all students at Yale are eligible to work on campus. Students on financial aid are given preference in the hiring process. The first 2 weeks of each term, only students on financial aid can be hired into a position. There are a couple limited circumstances. I'm thinking of our colleagues in Dwight Hall and various and other community service organizations with which we partner where federal work study is a requirement. Again, those are few and far between. So, and there is in general no difference in pay between whether you qualify for federal work study or not. It's not something that we really talk about a lot because in most cases it does not make a difference. But if you're curious as to whether you're eligible for federal work study, we would have included a note on your financial aid offer if you were. And a common refrain that you've heard from me throughout this webinar, if you have questions about your specific situation, the best person to speak with, to connect with, is your personal financial aid counselor. Let's see, there's a question about Yale health insurance. Are there other billed expenses not covered by Yale financial aid? There are, if you participate in one of Yale's orientation programs, there might be a small fee associated with that. That is not covered by financial aid, but in general, billed certainly tuition, housing, meals. You may have noticed the student activity fee on your financial aid offer letter, as well as the screenshot of the Yale Pay account. Do know that since that's included in your cost of attendance, if you were to waive that fee, we would reduce your financial aid by the same amount. So there's no net financial benefit to doing so. I see there's a question about having private health insurance and trying to figure out, should we stick with that and waive Yale health coverage, or should we, layer Yale health coverage on top of that? I would defer those questions to our colleagues in Yale Health Member Services. They can help you best make a decision as to what coverage is right for you. See a question now about the student share. Sit tight, join us in a couple weeks, and we'll go into more detail about that. But yes, working on campus is one of the ways in which you can cover the student share. If your parent share, if your parent contribution, I'll see if I can get there before Katie does, is not zero, or you are not an international student, then yes, that is an additional cost for that financial, we do not adjust your financial aid to cover. jobs working on campus, those do pay to you directly. They do not pay through your Yale Pay account. Those are paid on either, in most cases, a weekly, other cases, a semi-monthly basis, and those are done generally through direct deposit. Unfortunately, at Yale, we have different payment systems. So even if you've enrolled for direct deposit from your Yale Pay account, you have to separately enroll in direct deposit through our payroll office. But once you apply for and are hired into a position on campus, you'll receive information about how to do that. I see a question here about working on campus and whether the income is taxable. Yes, in most cases, that is considered taxable income. Whether that would then necessitate the filing of a tax return that would be dependent on how much you earn, and where that falls in terms of the filing limits for that particular year. There is a limit on the number of hours that a student can work, and this is whether you're on financial aid or not, and that's 19 hours when classes are in session, and otherwise 40 hours a week. There are some on-campus jobs available now. They are largely for the summer term. We do have a Yale Student Employment Office website that lists job opportunities. I would expect to see the jobs for the academic year. So for the fall semester, for example, those will be posted in earnest, I would say, certainly by August and beginning next month. But again, if you were to go on that site now, what you would see would largely be limited to summer opportunities. There is a fee for Yale for some or all Yale orientation programs, and it does vary by the program. And I believe that if you have not already, you will receive information about that from our colleagues in Student Affairs. That's the office that sends out that weekly email on Wednesday afternoons. We discussed I explained the number of hours that a student can work in terms of the amount of money a student can earn in a federal work study or term time job. That's that's worked out between the student and the hiring department or supervisor. It's largely, as you might imagine, driven by budget reasons. I think probably another part of that question is, or one that we often receive is, how much money can I earn before it will affect my financial aid? And in general, that's a pretty high number. Again, it depends on your specific situation. So if you want an absolute answer to this question, that would be one to direct at your your personal financial aid counselor, pardon me. But just to give you a ballpark idea, we're talking about in excess of $15,000 to $20,000 in a calendar year before there would be any effect on a student's financial aid. I see Taylor's answering the question about applying for loans. Again, we're going to cover that in our next webinar. I do apologize due to the late release of federal direct loan interest rates this year. Typically, that's done in early May. This year didn't happen until the end of May. And we do include what those interest rates are on our loan request forms. That's delayed the rollout of that form. Having a new website probably didn't help matters either, but those should be available shortly, either by the end of this week or next week. Okay, I think we're going to wrap things up here. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize. Um, and if you have subsequent questions, again, do know that you can find us online. That's why we deliberately stopped at this last slide. And there you'll also find our contact information, again, our phone number, our email address, contact form, means to schedule an appointment with our office, our street address if you happen to be in the area and you want to drop by. So thank you again for joining us. I hope that you found this webinar to be helpful, that it's answered a lot of questions that you had, maybe generated questions you didn't already have, but the more informed you are, the better. And we look forward to, for those of you who, out there who are students, we look forward to welcoming you onto campus in the fall. And for parents, guardians, family members, we are here to help throughout the student's time at Yale. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.